March 7th, 1935. Tom French saw no smoke rising from the cabin chimney on Friar Hill, Colorado. At 10,152 feet, a cold chimney meant death. Inside, he found Baby Doe Tabor frozen on the floor, her feet wrapped in gunny sacks, boxes of food stacked untouched around her body. She had been dead for 2 weeks. But here's what the coroner's report could not explain. Around her lay everything she needed to survive. Food, coal, money in her pocket. She had refused to use any of it. 35 years earlier, when this 45-year-old widow arrived with nothing, the merchants gave her 6 months. She lasted 35 winters. This is how she outlasted them all. Friar Hill, Colorado, 10,152 feet above sea level. Tom French saw it first. No smoke. The cabin chimney had gone cold, and in Leadville, a cold chimney meant one thing. He trudged through 4-foot drifts with Sue Bonney beside him. The snow squeaked under their boots, that particular sound it makes at single-digit temperatures. They reached the door, frozen shut. French put his shoulder into it, and the frame cracked. Inside, the body of an 81-year-old woman lay on the rough-planked floor near a tiny stove. The fire had been dead for weeks. Her feet were wrapped in gunny sacks. Her dress was torn and mud-stained. Around her, stacked against every wall, boxes of food sat unopened, boxes of clothing, never touched, candy, still wrapped. She had money in her pocket, coal in the bin. She had everything she needed to survive. She had refused to use any of it. The coroner would rule heart failure brought on by exposure, but that told only half the story. Elizabeth McCourt Tabor, Baby Doe to anyone who remembered, had not simply frozen to death. She had chosen this. 35 years of choosing every single winter until her body finally surrendered what her will would not. But 52 years earlier, on March 1st, 1883, Baby Doe Tabor was not a frozen corpse in a miner's shack. She was standing in the Willard Hotel ballroom in Washington, D.C., wearing a $7,000 white satin gown. Around her throat hung the Isabella necklace, $90,000 in diamonds. President Chester Arthur himself had come to witness her wedding. The newspapers called her the Silver Queen, and every woman in Denver society wanted her dead. The trouble with Baby Doe Tabor was that she won. She won when she should have lost, and she won by breaking every rule decent women followed. She arrived in Leadville, Colorado, in 1880, 26 years old, recently divorced, and utterly without prospects. Her first husband, Harvey Doe, had proved himself a failure at mining and a success at adultery. The courts in Central City had granted her the divorce in March of that year, a scandal in itself, a woman petitioning to end her own marriage. Respectable women did not do such things. Respectable women endured. Baby Doe was done enduring. Leadville in 1880 was the richest silver camp in the world. 10,000 feet up in the Colorado Rockies, where the air thinned your blood and the winters killed the careless, miners pulled fortunes from the earth and spent them on whiskey and women before the week was out. The population had exploded from nothing to 20,000 in 2 years. There was money in Leadville. There was opportunity. There was a shortage of beautiful women. Baby Doe was beautiful. That was the simple, undeniable fact that started everything. Golden hair, bright blue eyes, a peaches and cream complexion that made men stop talking mid-sentence when she walked past. She knew her effect. She had always known it. Within weeks of her arrival, she met Horace Tabor. He was 50 years old, married for 25 years, and the richest man in Colorado. He had made his first fortune grub-staking prospectors, putting up supplies in exchange for a share of whatever they found. The Matchless Mine, which he purchased in July of 1880 for $77,850, had already produced or worth nearly $2 million. He owned the Tabor Grand Opera House in Denver. He had just been appointed lieutenant governor. He was also desperately unhappy. His wife Augusta was sensible, practical, and cold. She had been a good partner when they were poor, but Horace Tabor was no longer poor, and Augusta would not let him forget that she disapproved of his extravagance. She disapproved of everything. She disapproved most of all, as it turned out, of Baby Doe. The affair was not discreet. Horace Tabor had never been discreet about anything. He bought Baby Doe a house. He bought her jewelry. He paraded her through Leadville while Augusta sat alone in Denver, waiting for her husband to remember he had a wife. Augusta would not give him a divorce. For 3 years she held on, and all of Denver society held on with her. They saw what Baby Doe was, a gold digger, a home wrecker, a woman without shame who had seduced a foolish old man for his money. The newspapers loved the scandal. Everyone had an opinion. No one had a kind word for Baby Doe. She did not care. Or if she cared, she did not show it. She waited. She trusted Horace. And in January of 1883, Augusta finally surrendered. She accepted a divorce settlement worth $250,000 in properties plus additional cash, and she walked away from her 25-year marriage with her reputation intact and her contempt undisguised. 2 months later, Baby Doe got her wedding. The President of the United States attended. The wives of senators and dignitaries did not. The $7,000 gown and the $90,000 necklace were reported in every newspaper in America. It was the wedding of the decade, and it was attended almost exclusively by men. When the Tabors returned to Denver, no one called on the new Mrs. Tabor. The invitation she had expected never came. The doors of Denver society remained closed. Every woman who had loved Augusta, and Augusta had been well loved, had decided that Baby Doe would never be forgiven. She could have every diamond Horace Tabor's money could buy. She would never have a friend. Baby Doe gave birth to Lily in 1884 and Silver Dollar in 1889. She raised her daughters in a mansion that no neighbor would enter, surrounded by wealth that no amount of money could make respectable. And for 10 years, that was enough. Horace loved her. Her children were healthy. The silver kept coming. Then, in October of 1893, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed, and the world ended. Silver dropped by a third overnight. 90 mines closed in Leadville alone. 2,500 men were unemployed before the month was out. Across Colorado, 9,500 mining jobs vanished. Fortunes that had taken decades to build evaporated in days. Horace Tabor lost everything. The Opera House sold. The Denver mansion sold. The jewelry, the furs, the horses, the carriages, all sold. Within months, the richest man in Colorado was working in the Cripple Creek mines for $3 a day, swinging a pickaxe alongside men who had once begged him for grub stakes. Baby Doe watched her husband break. She watched his health fail and his pride crumble. Political friends eventually secured him an appointment as Denver postmaster, a salary of $3,500 a year, a pittance compared to what he had once earned in a single afternoon. It was charity, and everyone knew it, but it kept them alive. On April 10th, 1899, Horace Tabor died of appendicitis at the Windsor Hotel. He was 69 years old. 10,000 people attended his funeral, the same people who had watched him fall, who had clucked their tongues at his misfortune while secretly relieved that his arrogance had finally been punished. Baby Doe stood at the grave with her 2 daughters and nothing else. No money, no savings, no property except a single worthless asset, the Matchless Mine, still in Horace's name, its shafts flooded, its equipment rusted, its ore long since exhausted. According to later accounts, Horace's final words to her were these: "Hold on to the Matchless. It will make millions again." Whether he said them or not, Baby Doe believed them. She would believe them for the rest of her life. The merchants in Leadville gave her 6 months. Old man Ferguson at the general store had seen 100 widows come through town. Mining was a dying business, and it left widows like a fever leaves bodies. Most of them remarried fast or left faster. A woman alone could not survive at 10,000 feet. The altitude exhausted you. The winters killed you. The work of simply staying alive, hauling wood, hauling water, keeping a fire burning through nights that dropped to 38 below zero, would break a strong man, let alone a 45-year-old widow with 2 daughters and no skills beyond being beautiful. Ferguson told his customers she would be gone by Christmas. They agreed. It was not cruelty, exactly. It was mathematics. The math was brutal. To heat a cabin through a Leadville winter, you needed 10 to 12 cords of wood minimum. A cord was 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet of stacked timber, 128 cubic feet. Cutting, splitting, and stacking a single cord took a healthy man the better part of a day. Baby Doe would need to cut, split, and stack enough wood for 3 people while also finding food, finding income, and somehow holding onto a mine that produced nothing but memories. The cabin itself was a tool shed, 12 by 16 feet of weathered planking with a tiny stove, 2 windows she would eventually nail shut against the wind, and walls too thin to hold heat against the mountain cold. It sat on Friar Hill, a mile and a half from town, exposed to every wind that swept down from the peaks. The temperature in January averaged 3 degrees above zero. The average annual snowfall was 142 inches. There were 278 freezing days per year. Every number said the same thing. Impossible. Baby Doe looked at the numbers. She looked at the cabin. She looked at the flooded shafts and rusted equipment of the Matchless Mine. And she made a choice that every practical person in Colorado knew was madness. She stayed. Her brother Peter arrived from Wisconsin in the fall of 1899 with an offer and an ultimatum. He found her in the cabin, unpacking the few possessions she had managed to keep from the creditors. The children, Lily was 15, Silver Dollar was 10, sat on a mattress in the corner, watching their mother hang religious pictures on the rough plank walls. Peter looked around the room, 12 by 16 feet. A stove barely large enough to heat a closet, no running water, no neighbors within shouting distance. Outside, the first snow of the season was already falling. "Elizabeth," he said, "this is not living. This is dying slowly." She did not turn from her work. "Horace told me to hold on." "Horace is dead." Peter crossed to the window and stared out at the abandoned headframe of the Matchless. "The mine is dead. The shafts are flooded. Even Horace couldn't make it produce at the end. You're gambling your daughter's lives on a hole in the ground." Baby Doe finally turned. Her eyes were steady. Her voice was quiet. "If I leave, the creditors will take it. This is all we have left of him." "You have nothing left of him. Memories aren't property. You can take memories back to Wisconsin. Mother has room. The girls can go to school. You can start over." "Start over." She said it like she was tasting something bitter. "Go back to Oshkosh and admit they were right about me, the gold digger who got what she deserved." "Elizabeth, I will not crawl back to Wisconsin. I will not give them the satisfaction." She turned back to hanging her pictures. St. Teresa, the Virgin Mary, a crucifix above the bed. "I made a promise to my husband. I intend to keep it." Peter stayed 3 days. He argued. He pleaded. He showed her the foreclosure notices and the outstanding debts and the complete impossibility of surviving what she was attempting. Baby Doe listened politely and did not budge. Before he left, Peter did something she would never know about. He walked down to the Leadville grocer and made an arrangement. Whatever Elizabeth Tabor needed, flour, sugar, coffee, whatever kept her alive, Peter McCourt would pay the bill. The grocer was to extend credit indefinitely and send the invoices to Wisconsin. "Don't tell her," Peter said. "She won't accept charity. Tell her the mine account still has credit from the old days. Make something up. Just keep her alive until she comes to her senses." Peter returned to Wisconsin. He would pay his sister's grocery bills quietly for the next 15 years, and she would never know. The women of Denver society heard about Baby Doe's situation and felt something that might have been satisfaction. Margaret Brown, Molly, they called her, though never to her face, was one of the few who disagreed. She had clawed her way up from poverty herself. She knew what it meant to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. But Molly Brown was an exception. Most of the women who lunched at the Denver Club remembered Augusta Tabor's humiliation, and they had long memories. "She'll give up soon enough," said Mrs. Crawford at a Thursday luncheon. "That kind of woman always does. She's too soft for real hardship. Give her one winter up there, and she'll be looking for another rich husband." "Who would have her?" asked Mrs. Patterson. "She's 45. She has 2 children. She's been nothing but a scandal since the day she arrived." "Someone will. Someone always does." Mrs. Crawford sipped her tea. "Women like that find a way. It's what they're bred for." 300 miles away, in a cabin smaller than Mrs. Crawford's powder room, Baby Doe Tabor was splitting firewood. Her hands were blistered. Her back ached. The children watched from the doorway, too young to help much, too old to ignore what was happening to their family. She had perhaps 4 cords of wood stacked against the cabin wall. She needed 10 to be safe. Winter was 8 weeks away. The axe rose and fell, rose and fell. 1 log at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time. That was the only strategy Baby Doe had. Survive today, then survive tomorrow. Keep the fire burning, keep the claim active, wait for silver to rise. It would not rise, not in her lifetime. But she did not know that yet, and even if she had known, it might not have mattered. Some promises are kept because they should be kept, and some promises are kept because the person making them has nothing else left. Orchestrated narrative pacing and word count distribution across sections. I need to continue with the community resistance and construction and countdown sections. Let me track my word count. I'm probably around 2,500 to 2,800 words so far. I need to get to 5,000 to 6,000 words for chunk 1. Let me continue with community resistance, 600 to 800 words. Daughters abandoning her construction and countdown. Part 1, 1,500 to 1,800 words. The decades of survival, the physical toll. Then end at maximum tension before the final crisis. The first winter came, and Baby Doe survived it. The second winter came, and she survived that too. The merchants adjusted their predictions. Maybe she had a year in her, maybe 2. The altitude would get her eventually. The cold would find the weakness in her walls, the gaps in her wood supply, the moment when her body simply gave out. Ferguson told his customers to wait. Nature was patient. Nature always won. But Baby Doe found a strategy. She leased the mining claim to any prospector willing to work the flooded shafts. The terms were simple. They kept whatever they found, minus a percentage that maintained her ownership. Most of them found nothing. A few found enough to pay her grocery bills for a month. It was not wealth. It was not even comfort. But it was survival. She learned to read the weather by the color of the sky over Mount Elbert. She learned how much wood she needed banked before the first hard freeze. She learned to wrap her feet in rags when her boots wore through, to seal the window cracks with newspaper and flour paste, to sleep in her clothes when the temperature dropped past 0. The cabin became her world. 12 by 16 feet of existence, surrounded by religious pictures that multiplied on the walls like prayers made visible. She talked to Horus. She talked to God. She wrote in journals that recorded dreams and visions and conversations with spirits no one else could see. Leadville watched and wondered. The Silver Queen had become the mad woman of the Matchless. Lily was 18 when she decided she had suffered enough. The year was 1902. Baby Doe had taken the girls to Wisconsin to visit relatives, the first time in 3 years she had left the mine. Lily saw the difference immediately. Running water, warm rooms, beds that did not smell of wood smoke and desperation. Normal life, lived by normal people who did not talk to dead husbands or guard worthless mines with shotguns. She told her mother she would stay, just for a while, just to help grandmother. Baby Doe looked at her eldest daughter and saw the lie. But what could she say? How could she argue that the cabin was better than this? How could she explain that the Matchless was worth more than comfort, more than warmth, more than everything ordinary life could offer? Lily stayed in Wisconsin. She moved to Chicago a few years later. She married her first cousin in 1908, and slowly, steadily, she erased her mother from her life. When people asked where she came from, Lily said she barely remembered. When they asked about her family, she said there was no one worth mentioning. When reporters eventually came looking for Baby Doe Tabor's daughter, Lily told them she was not sure who they meant. Silver Dollar stayed longer. She had her father's recklessness, his appetite for risk, his absolute inability to do the sensible thing. She helped her mother with the claim. She walked to town for supplies. She learned to split wood and haul water and survive at 10,000 feet. But she was 19, then 20, then 25. The cabin grew smaller every year. The isolation pressed harder. She began making trips to Denver just for a few days, she said, just to see the city. The trips grew longer. She found work at the Denver Post, writing small articles for small pay. She sent money home when she had it. She sent letters when she did not. But she stopped coming back to the Matchless, and eventually she stopped pretending she would. Baby Doe was alone. 1911, Chicago. A meeting that should have been a reunion. Baby Doe had tracked down Lily's address. She made the journey with Silver Dollar, a rare trip for both of them, mother and younger daughter traveling together across a country that had forgotten them. They arrived at Lily's apartment building expecting awkwardness, perhaps, but also expecting family. Lily opened the door and did not step aside. She was 32 years old. She had a husband, a life, a carefully constructed identity that did not include being the daughter of the most scandalous woman in Colorado history. She looked at her mother's weathered face, her sister's restless eyes, and she made a calculation. "I'm sorry," she said. "I barely know you." Baby Doe stared at her daughter. "Lily, we raised you. You raised me in shame." Lily's voice was flat. "Father lost everything because he was a fool, and you've spent 20 years living in a shack because you're too proud to admit he was wrong. The mine is worthless. It's always been worthless. Why can't you see that?" Silver Dollar stepped forward. "She's our mother. She's a stranger who sends letters I don't read." Lily's hand was on the door. "I have a life now, a real life. I'm sorry you came all this way." The door closed. Baby Doe stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the stairs. Silver Dollar followed, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. It was the last time any of them were in the same room together. The years accumulated like snowdrifts against the cabin walls. 1910. The mine leases produced almost nothing now. Baby Doe sold her jewelry piece by piece, the pieces Horace had given her, the remnants of $90,000 necklaces reduced to wedding rings and watch fobs. She kept only her engagement ring. She kept Horace's watch chain. Everything else went to the pawn shops of Leadville for pennies on the dollar. 1915. She was 61 years old. The walk to town for mail took most of a morning now. The thin air that had once just tired her now left her gasping at the top of every small rise. She began falling on the icy roads, falling and lying there sometimes, until she could find the strength to push herself back up. 1920. She was 66. Silver Dollar still sent money when she could, but Silver Dollar had problems of her own now. Alcohol, men, jobs she kept losing, and apartments she kept leaving. Baby Doe received letters that worried her, then letters that terrified her, then long silences that were worse than any letter. September 1925. A telegram arrived at the Leadville post office. Baby Doe walked the mile to town to collect it, as she did every week. The postmaster handed it over without meeting her eyes. Silver Dollar was dead. Found in a Chicago apartment, scalded to death under circumstances no one could explain. Suicide, perhaps. An accident, perhaps. Murder, perhaps. The newspapers called it mysterious. They called Silver Dollar's life tragic. They mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she was the daughter of the notorious Baby Doe Tabor. Baby Doe walked back to the Matchless. She did not speak to anyone. She did not stop at the grocer's for supplies. She simply walked, one foot in front of the other, until she reached the cabin door and closed it behind her. When people asked about Silver Dollar afterward, Baby Doe told them her daughter had become a nun, somewhere far away, too devoted to God to write. It was a beautiful life, she said, a holy life. No one believed her, but no one had the heart to argue. By 1927, Baby Doe had mortgaged the Matchless so many times that she had lost track of the debts. Each loan had paid off the previous loan, which had paid off the loan before that, stretching back decades to the first desperate month after Horace died. Now the mathematics finally caught up. The Shorgo Mining Company purchased the claim. The company was owned by J.K. Mullen, a Denver millionaire, a Catholic like Baby Doe, a man who had heard the stories about the old woman alone on Friar Hill. He could have evicted her. The mine was legally his. She had no claim anymore, no right to the cabin, No reason to exist on property she did not own. Mullen made a different choice. He told his people to let her stay. He arranged for coal deliveries through the winter. He paid for repairs to the cabin roof without telling her where the money came from. When she thanked God for her good fortune, she did not know she was thanking J.K. Mullen. Baby Doe believed she was maintaining the Tabor legacy through her own will. She believed the mine was still hers, still waiting, still ready to make millions when silver rose again. She believed this because she had to believe it, because 30 years of suffering demanded that it be true. Every winter night, she checked the stove before sleeping. Every winter morning, she woke before dawn to add wood before the fire died. Every winter, she survived another year that should have killed her. The merchants of Leadville had stopped predicting her death. She had outlasted most of them. The 1930s arrived. The Depression hit. Leadville, already dying, began its final collapse. The population drained away to cities that had jobs, to camps that had hope, to anywhere but this frozen ghost town at the top of the world. Baby Doe stayed. 1934 became 1935. She was 81 years old now. Her hair had gone white. Her body had shrunk into itself, bent by decades of cold and labor and loneliness. She walked to town less often. The mile each way took hours now, and she fell more than she walked. But she still went. The post office was her only connection to anything beyond the cabin walls, and she would not surrender it. February 1935. The grocer's delivery boy, Elmer Kutzik, saw her on the road and stopped his truck. She was struggling through the snow, her feet wrapped in gunny sacks, her dress torn and muddy. She told him she had fallen several times. He helped her into the truck and drove her as far as the road would go, about half a mile from the cabin. Beyond that, the drifts were too deep for anything with wheels. She thanked him. She climbed out. She waved as he drove away. Then she turned and began the walk to her cabin, through 4 feet of snow, alone. It was the last time anyone saw Baby Doe Tabor alive. The calendar on Baby Doe's wall showed February 20th, 1935. She had marked it with a small notation, her trip to town, the ride from Elmer Kutzik. It was the last entry she would ever make. Outside the cabin, the temperature hovered in the single digits. Not the worst Leadville could offer. She had survived nights of 38 below, but cold enough to kill anyone who stopped paying attention. The snow lay deep on Friar Hill, 4 feet in the drifts, deeper where the wind had piled it against the cabin walls. The path from the road had disappeared under white. Every step she had taken to reach her door had been a negotiation with the mountain. She made it inside. She closed the door against the cold. She would not open it again. The cabin at the end looked nothing like the tool shed she had moved into 35 years earlier. Every wall was covered now, religious pictures layered over religious pictures, saints and Madonnas and crucifixes competing for space, their frames touching, overlapping, climbing toward the ceiling. Stacks of newspapers reached from floor to rafters, yellowed columns of newsprint she had saved for reasons she could no longer remember. Old letters, old photographs, the detritus of a life that had contracted from mansions to this single room. The stove sat in the center of everything, the heart that kept the cabin alive. A tiny thing, barely adequate for the space, but Baby Doe had learned its rhythms over 3 decades. She knew how much wood it needed, how often to feed it, exactly how long the coals would hold between feedings. She knew that letting it die meant death, and she had not let it die in 35 winters. She had coal, Mullen's charity, though she did not know it. She had food, boxes of it, stacked against the walls, sent by people who remembered the Silver Queen and could not bear to let her starve. She had money, a small amount, enough for weeks of supplies if she had been willing to walk to town. She had everything she needed to survive, but she was 81 years old. She had walked miles through snow to collect mail that contained nothing. She had fallen repeatedly, her thin body hitting the frozen ground, struggling back to her feet, falling again. The cold had seeped into her bones. The exhaustion had accumulated across decades until it felt like a weight she could no longer carry. At some point in the days after February 20th, Baby Doe Tabor lay down near her stove and did not get up. The fire burned for a while. Then it died. and the cold came in. No one came to check on her. That was the simple truth of her situation. She had spent so many years pushing people away that no one was left to notice her absence. The delivery boys who brought coal and food came on schedules she had arranged to minimize contact. The postmaster held her mail, but had no reason to worry if she missed a week. Her neighbors on Friar Hill, Tom French, Sue Bonney, kept their distance out of respect for her privacy. She had made it clear she wanted to be left alone. So she was left alone. The snow kept falling. The drifts rose higher around the cabin. The chimney that should have been trailing smoke went cold and stayed cold. Days passed. A week. Then another. It was the silence that finally broke through. Tom French had lived near the Matchless for years. He knew the rhythms of Baby Doe's existence, the thin trail of smoke from her chimney, the occasional sight of her trudging toward town, the sounds of someone living just over the ridge. When the silence stretched too long, he mentioned it to Sue Bonney. When the smoke stayed absent through a week of freezing nights, they both knew something had changed. March 7th. They made their way through the drifts together. The snow squeaked underfoot, that particular compression sound of extreme cold. The cabin looked abandoned. No smoke, no tracks, no sign of life. French tried the door and found it frozen in its frame. He put his shoulder into it. The wood cracked and gave. The smell hit them first, then the cold. Then the sight of her, lying on the floor beside the stove, her body frozen solid, her face turned toward the ceiling as if she had been watching something only she could see. Her feet were wrapped in gunny sacks. Her dress was the same torn, mud-stained garment she had been wearing when Kutsich gave her a ride. Around her untouched sat the charity she had refused to accept. Boxes of food, boxes of clothing, gifts from people who had tried to help a woman too proud to be helped. The coroner came. He examined the body and made his ruling. Acute myocarditis, heart failure brought on by exposure. She had been dead approximately 2 weeks since around February 20th, the day she had last been seen alive. The day she had marked on her calendar with such careful notation. They carried Baby Doe Tabor out of her cabin and down Friar Hill through the snow. The same path she had walked 10,000 times. The last journey she would ever make. The news spread through Leadville within hours. She was dead. The madwoman of the Matchless, the Silver Queen who had become a ghost, the woman who had outlasted every prediction of her demise, she was finally, actually dead. People stopped each other on the street to share the news. They gathered in the general store and the post office and the few remaining saloons, trading stories about the strange old woman who had guarded a worthless mine for 35 years. Ferguson at the general store remembered when she first arrived. He had given her 6 months. He had been wrong by 34.5 years. The miners who had leased her claim remembered her terms: fair, always fair, never greedy even when she had nothing. The delivery boys remembered her dignity, the way she thanked them as if they were doing her a favor rather than delivering charity. The postmaster remembered her walking to town every week, no matter the weather, because the mail was her last connection to a world that had forgotten her. They had called her mad. They had called her stubborn. They had called her a fool for believing that silver would rise, that the Matchless would produce again, that Horace Tabor's dying words were anything but the fantasy of a broken man. Now they called her something else. They were not sure what, exactly, but they knew the old words no longer fit. The funeral was held March 13, 1935, at the Church of the Annunciation in Leadville. Father E. L. Horgan officiated. Several hundred people attended. Several hundred. In a dying town that barely had that many residents left. They came from the mines and the shops and the scattered cabins on the hillsides. They came because they had known her, or because they had heard of her, or because they could not quite believe that the story had finally ended. The night before the funeral, Baby Doe's body lay in state at the Moynihan O'Malia mortuary. She wore a simple brown dress in a gray casket. Flickering candles lit her face, a face that had once been called the handsomest in Colorado, now weathered and lined by 8 decades of living and 35 years of surviving. People who had avoided her in life came to see her in death. They filed past the casket, one by one, and they looked at the woman who had refused to surrender. Some of them had mocked her, some of them had pitied her. Now they stood in silence, and whatever they were feeling was too complicated for mockery or pity. Old man Ferguson was there. He stood at the back of the church during the funeral mass, his hat in his hands, his face unreadable. After the service, someone asked him what he thought. Ferguson, who had predicted Baby Doe would not last a single Leadville winter. Ferguson, who had watched her walk past his store for 35 years in increasingly ragged clothing, who had extended credit on her brother's secret account, who had seen her transform from scandal to spectacle to something almost like legend. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She proved something. I'm not sure what, but she proved it." That was as close to an apology as Ferguson ever came. Peter McCourt arrived from Wisconsin for the funeral. He was old now himself, old and tired, and he had made the long journey knowing he would bury the sister he had tried to save for 35 years. He paid for the funeral. He spoke to the reporters who had descended on Leadville looking for the end of the Baby Doe story. He answered their questions with the patience of a man who had stopped being surprised by his sister's choices long ago. "We tried to get her to leave," he told them. "Every year I asked. Every year she refused. That was Elizabeth. Once she decided something, she didn't change her mind." They asked him if she was mad. They asked if the mine had ever had a chance of producing. They asked why anyone would choose to freeze to death in a shack when they had family waiting to take them in. Peter shook his head. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said. "The question isn't why she stayed. The question is what she thought was worth staying for." He did not have an answer. He had never had an answer. But he had paid her grocery bills for 15 years without telling her, because even when he thought she was wrong, he respected what she was trying to do. The women of Denver heard about Baby Doe's death and felt something they had not expected. For 50 years they had held their grudge. They had refused to call on the second Mrs. Tabor. They had closed their doors and whispered their judgments and congratulated themselves on their virtue. Baby Doe had broken the rules and they had made her pay. Now she was dead. Frozen to death in a miner's shack, her feet wrapped in gunny sacks, her body undiscovered for 2 weeks. She had paid a price that made their small cruelties look exactly as small as they were. A collection was taken up. The same society that had refused Baby Doe Tabor a single invitation now raised money to transport her body to Denver for burial. The same women who had called her a gold digger and a home wrecker now contributed to ensure she would lie beside the man she had loved. It was not quite an apology. Denver society did not apologize, but it was an acknowledgement that something had shifted, that the old judgments no longer held, that 50 years of contempt had been rendered meaningless by 35 years of devotion. Baby Doe was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery, beside Horace. The grave that Augusta's family had prepared for her at St. Joseph Cemetery went unused. In death, as in life, Baby Doe had won the final argument. The conversions came slowly, then all at once. The reporters who had covered the funeral went back to their papers and wrote stories that did not sound like the old Baby Doe stories. They wrote about devotion. They wrote about faith. They wrote about a woman who had kept a promise no one expected her to keep. The editors who had spent decades calling her a scandal began printing different words. The Silver Queen Redeemed, one headline read. The Last True Believer, read another. Love story ends in frozen cabin, said a third. And for once the word love appeared without irony. Molly Brown, who had outlived the Titanic and would outlive Baby Doe by only a few months, heard the news and wept. She had tried to help over the years. She had sent money when she could, but Baby Doe had been too proud to accept much, and Molly had been too respectful to force the issue. Now she told anyone who would listen that Baby Doe Tabor had been the strongest woman she had ever known. They called her soft, Molly said. They said she couldn't survive real hardship. She survived 35 winters at 10,000 feet. She survived losing everything, her money, her daughters, her mind. And she never complained, not once. She just kept going. The hostile women of Denver society had no response to that. What could they say? They had judged Baby Doe for breaking up a marriage 50 years ago. She had outlived that judgment. She had outlived Augusta. She had outlived most of them. and she had done it through sheer, stubborn, incomprehensible will. The Matchless Mine never produced another dollar of silver. That was the fact that made Baby Doe's story impossible to dismiss as practical wisdom. She had not been right about the mine. She had not been right about silver rising. She had not been right about the fortune that would restore her family's name. She had only been right about one thing, that some promises are worth keeping even when they cost everything. The mine sat empty after her death. The cabin fell into disrepair. Squatters moved in and moved out. The mountain winners did their slow work of destruction. For 15 years, it seemed like Baby Doe's vigil would be forgotten, along with everything else about Leadville's silver boom. Then, in the 1950s, something changed. People began coming to see the Matchless. Not miners looking for ore, there was no ore left. Tourists, pilgrims almost. They had heard the story of Baby Doe Tabor, and they wanted to see the place where she had spent 35 years waiting for a miracle that never came. The Leadville Assembly recognized what they had. They restored the cabin. They preserved the head frame and the hoist house. They left Baby Doe's things exactly where she had left them, the religious pictures on the walls, the stacks of newspapers, the tiny stove that had been her only defense against the cold. 1953. The Matchless Mine opened as a museum. Visitors could walk through the cabin and see the 12 by 16 feet where Baby Doe had lived and died. They could read her journals, her letters, her careful notations of dreams and visions and conversations with the dead. They could stand in the doorway and look out at Mount Elbert and Mount Massive and try to imagine what it had felt like to watch 35 winners pass from that view. The mad woman of the Matchless had become a tourist attraction. But more than that, she had become a symbol. The artists found her first. 1932, 3 years before her death, Warner Brothers had released a film called Silver Dollar. It told a fictionalized version of the Tabor story, with Edward G. Robinson as a character transparently based on Horace. The movie was not kind to the Baby Doe character, but it introduced the story to a national audience that had never heard of Leadville or the Silver Crash. After her death, the story grew. Writers and playwrights saw something in Baby Doe that transcended the tabloid scandal. They saw a woman who had chosen loyalty over comfort, faith over reason, love over survival. The facts of her life became raw material for myth. 1956. The Central City Opera premiered The Ballad of Baby Doe, with music by Douglas Moore and libretto by John Latouche. It told the story from Baby Doe's perspective, her love for Horace, her rejection by society, her long vigil at the Matchless. The final scene showed her as an old woman, alone in the cabin, singing an aria called Always Through the Changing as the snow fell outside her window. The opera was a sensation. Critics called it the finest American opera since Porgy and Bess. Beverly Sills sang the title role at the New York premiere in 1958 and made it her signature part. Suddenly, Baby Doe Tabor was not just a Colorado legend. She was a national tragedy, her story told and retold in opera houses from coast to coast. The restaurants came next. By the 1970s, a chain of establishments called Baby Doe's Matchless Mine operated across the country, trading on the name of a woman who had died with gunny sacks on her feet. It was crass, perhaps. It was also a measure of how completely her story had entered American mythology. Today, the Matchless Mine is operated by the National Mining Hall of Fame. Seasonal tours guide visitors through the 3 original structures: Baby Doe's cabin, the number 6 head frame, the hoist house. The cabin looks much as it did in 1935, preserved against the mountain weather that would otherwise have claimed it decades ago. History Colorado maintains her personal effects, including the remnants of her wedding dress. The $7,000 gown that had once dazzled President Chester Arthur has not aged well. Silk rots, beading falls away. Time does its work. But it still exists, a physical reminder of everything Baby Doe had been before she became everything she would be. The tourists who visit ask the same questions that Peter McCourt could not answer, that the reporters at her funeral could not answer, that no one has ever fully answered. Why did she stay? Was she mad? Was she devoted? Was there a difference? Did she really believe the mine would produce again, Or did she know, somewhere beneath the faith, that she was guarding a grave? The answers depend on who you ask. Some say she was mentally ill, her mind broken by loss, trapped in a delusion she could not escape. Some say she was the sanest person in Colorado, the only one who understood that money meant nothing, that society's approval meant nothing, that the only thing that mattered was keeping your word. The truth is probably somewhere between. The truth usually is. But here's what we know for certain. Baby Doe Tabor was born Elizabeth McCourt in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, the daughter of a shopkeeper. She married badly, divorced boldly, and fell in love with the richest man in Colorado. She wore $90,000 necklaces. She attended parties with presidents. She was called the handsomest woman in Colorado. Then she lost everything. Her husband died. Her fortune vanished. Her daughters abandoned her. Society erased her, and she chose to stay. For 35 years, in a 12 by 16-foot cabin at 10,152 feet, through temperatures that dropped to 38 below zero, through isolation and starvation and madness, Baby Doe Tabor held onto the Matchless Mine. Not because it would make her rich again, it never did, but because she had promised. When they found her frozen body, there was food she had not eaten, money she had not spent, charity she had not accepted. She died with her pride intact and her promise unbroken. The Matchless Mine never produced another dollar of silver, but it produced something else, a story that has outlasted every fortune it ever made. March 7th, 1935. Friar Hill, Colorado, 10,152 feet above sea level. Tom French saw it first. No smoke. The cabin chimney had gone cold. They found her on the floor near the stove, her feet wrapped in gunny sacks, her face turned toward the ceiling. She had been alone for 2 weeks. She had been alone, in truth, for 35 years. And then they came. Not with invitations to parties she had been denied. Not with the social acceptance she had been refused. Not with the silver that would have vindicated everything. They came with something else. The merchants came. The ones who had predicted her failure. The reporters came. The ones who had chronicled her scandal. The society women came. The ones who had closed their doors. The tourists came, year after year, decade after decade, wanting to see the place where a woman had kept a promise that made no sense. They came begging for her story, begging to understand how someone could choose faith over comfort, loyalty over reason, love over life itself, begging to know what she had found in that frozen cabin that was worth more than everything she had lost. Baby Doe Tabor never answered. She had already given her answer, written in 35 winters of survival, in gunny sacks and religious pictures, and a fire she kept burning until she could not burn it anymore. She kept her promise. That was her answer. That was her victory. And in the end, it was enough.